Hey guys, thanks for joining me today as I make a special soap inspired by the book Robinson Crusoe. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to read a little bit of the book to get you interested. If you have read the book, let me know in the comments what you enjoyed about this book. It's a classic book, but I had not read it until the last 6 or 7 years. I was actually on bed rest with a pregnancy, and my husband was like bringing me things to try to keep me occupied. And he's like, "Here, read this book." So I read it, and I loved it. Obviously, I'd heard of it before, but I'd never read it. And so I am planning a literary theme for my soap collection, and I was like, this has to happen. I have to have a Robinson Crusoe soap. So here it is. So the main gist of this is to look like a wild animal print, and then on top you'll see at the end I have some embeds that I put on, and those were some of the fruit from the island that Robinson Crusoe was stuck on for, I believe, 26 years, 23 years. It's been like several years since I've actually read this, so I don't remember, but it was so cool how he was stuck on this island and he learned how to adapt, and he learned how to get his own food and to protect himself. And I didn't realize that there were cannibals in the book until I was like 3/4 of the way through the book, and I was already hooked because normally I don't go in for the gory, scary, really danger type stuff. And I was thinking, okay, this book's good, this is whatever, but then those appeared out of nowhere. So there was that. But other than that, it was just such a delight to read this book. So I have several different layers of orange, starting with a gradient of light orange, moving on to a more pigmented. And you can see here I'm dripping on some black. That is supposed to represent the spots and an animal print. I don't actually know what animal print I was going for here, if it was a tiger or a lion. I don't really know, okay? I don't. I think I was just like going for animal print, general animal print. And because those are in the book, and I believe he doesn't know what kind of animal it is, and he is escaping from, because he was kidnapped, and he's escaping on this little dinghy of a boat, and an animal comes after him from the shore, and he ends up killing it. But there was a lot of wild animals. It was just a wild adventure overall. The scent that I used was super masculine. I wanted to have something that was earthy and yet obviously very masculine because the main character is a man. And so, yeah, I just did a bunch of different layers, like I said, of this orange. If you see some little chunky bits in that orange, it's just the colorant, and I do actually blend it out in every single layer, but it's a little disturbing to see those kind of float into the smaller picture there, but they do get blended out. And here I'm adding the fragrance oil. I do add the fragrance oil to each individual layer because the fragrance oil does set up fairly quickly, which is good when you're doing layers. So I planned that all out in advance to make sure I had something that would work really well for this design. Now I'm just going to read a portion from the book Robinson Crusoe because I have it in printed edition. I am definitely more of a printed book person. I don't necessarily like to read stuff on like the Kindle because you lose the luster of the smell of the page and the thrill of turning another page and accomplishing your goal of finishing a book and holding it in your hands. You just don't get that in the electronic version. So I have this one in front of me. It is by Daniel Defoe, and I'm just going to read a portion of his life on the island. And this is shortly after he got on the island. And the chapter is entitled, "I Build My Fortress." My thoughts were now wholly employed about securing myself against either savages, if any should appear, or wild beasts, if any were in the island. And I had many thoughts of the method how to do this, and what kind of dwelling to make, whether I should make me a cave in the earth, or a tent upon the earth? And in short, I resolved upon both, the manner and description of which it may not be improper to give an account of. I soon found the place I was in was not for my settlement, particularly because it was upon a low moorish ground near the sea, and I believed would not be wholesome, and more particularly because there was no fresh water near it. So I resolved to find a more healthy and more convenient spot of ground. I consulted several things in my situation, which I found would be proper for me. First, health and fresh water, I just now mentioned. Secondly, shelter from the heat of the sun. Thirdly, security from ravenous creatures, whether man or beast. Fourthly, a view to the sea, that if God sent any ship in sight, I might not lose any advantage for my deliverance, of which I was not willing to banish all my expectation yet. In search of a place proper for this, I found a little plain on the side of a rising hill, whose front towards this little plain was steep as a house side, so that nothing could come down upon me from the top on the side of this rock. There was a hollow place, worn a little way in, like the entrance or door of a cave. But there was not really any cave or way into the rock at all. On the flat of the green, just before the hollow place, I resolved to pitch my tent. This plain was not above 100 yards broad, and about twice as long, and lay like a green before my door, and at the end of it descended irregularly every way down into the low grounds by the seaside. Into this tent I brought all my provisions, and everything that would spoil by the wet. And having thus enclosed all my goods, I made up the entrance, which till now I had left open, and so passed and repassed, as I said, by a short ladder. When I had done this, I began to work my way into the rock, and bringing all the earth and stones that I dug down out through my tent, I laid them up within my fence in the nature of a terrace, so that it raised the ground within about 1.5 feet, and thus I made a cave just behind my tent, which served me like a cellar to my house. So it just goes on. This is telling how he builds his house, and there's very vivid pictures. And I love it because he doesn't have all the conveniences. If you think of like Swiss Family Robinson, something like that, except he's alone. And he's alone for a couple decades on this little island. And there are so many different things that he has to overcome. And, he just is very strong. He gets to really low points. He has high points. And he reaches out to God during this time. It's just so beautiful and so raw. There's something just absolutely, utterly lovely about this book. I don't know why, because it's not my personal typical book that I like to read, but like I said, there's just something extremely drawing to it and raw and vulnerable, and I just love it. So there were a lot of design elements to this particular soap, and I didn't really have a guarantee. I didn't have a YouTube video that I was following. I didn't have a diagram. I didn't have someone, make this design and me try to figure out how they did it. I literally just tried to figure it out myself. I had this image in my head and I tried to take it apart like an engineer, like a soap engineer. And I just tried to pick piece per piece apart to see how I could do this. And when I saw it after it was cut, I honestly was a little disappointed because it wasn't exactly what I had envisioned. But I'm really pleased and proud of myself for trying this because, like any soap you make, there is no guarantee. I mean, there's so many different variables, and even if you've been making soap for a crazy long time, which I've not, I'm just in my second year of soap making, and but the longer you go on, you kind of have this idea that, hey, I'm going to get this right. It's always going to work out. But you don't. You're always learning. And that's part of why I love soap making, is because it's a continual challenge. You never really arrive like, oh, I know all of the answers now, because you work with a new material, whether it's an oil or a fragrance or a colorant or an additive or your temperature changes, or the humidity changes, or it goes through gel phase and you didn't expect it to, or it doesn't go through gel phase and you did expect it to. There's just so many different pieces to soap making that it feels like a wild animal all of its own. So it's really interesting. You really never know what you're gonna get. And like I said, I'm really proud of this batch because I tried something, I wasn't sure how it was gonna work. I just kind of pieced it together and it came out. I'm really happy with it. So I'm just adding these last little layers of soap, and the last layers I actually had more kaolin clay, which is white. It's a white powder, and I add it to my fragrance oil to help anchor that fragrance in the soap. It does add some nice qualities to the soap. I don't know how to describe it other than there's a nice slip. It's not like slippery, like sticky, but it's just a nice glide to the soap. But it also helps to anchor that fragrance. So I soak my fragrance in kaolin clay, but it kind of sinks to the bottom of the container. So the last bit of fragrance oil always has a little bit more kaolin clay, and it always gets the soap batter a little bit lighter if they're in layers, and I don't measure it properly to get kaolin clay in every layer. So here I'm just doing a little design on the top. I wanted it to look like a wild animal on the top as well as the inside, so I just kind of left it splattered, and then I ended up taking a chopstick, and yeah, ouch, poor little lemon. Look at that lemon slice. What is that? So, yeah, the top was not set up enough to sustain those embeds. They were quite large, these embeds. They don't look that large, but they really are. And I made those out of melt and pour soap. I have little citrus shaped molds, and because of the fruits on the island that Robinson Crusoe was on, it really inspired me. I'm like, I need to have those lemons in my soap. So I only have 8 embeds for this soap batch, and I have 10 bars of soap per batch. So 2 of the bars do not have a lemon slice, but I'm like, you know what, that's okay. The soap smells amazing. The design is so cool. Even if some of them don't have those lemon slices on top, it's still going to be grand. So it's just kind of annoying when you see like on either end there's no embed. Come on. But it's super cool. I love the contrasting colors. They're so vivid. And here we are at the cutting. I get excited literally every time. I've made more than 350 batches of soap, and this part never gets old for me. I'm excited literally each time. And I love that because I've been asked how I still am interested in making soap. I just am. And there it is. Woohoo! There is the soap. I love it. I love it. I love it. And there's the book. I don't know what version this is. What version is this? Probably from the 80s. Something like that. It's grand. Well, guys, thanks for coming along for this video. And if you haven't read the book, pick it up. Get it from your library. You will not be disappointed.